Joining us is National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar, who has had strong opinions about this trial from the very beginning. And correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but you, I believe, are on the side of that state has not proven their case, that you are certainly, like me, sitting with quite a bit of reasonable doubt.
Yeah, I believe that there's no way they met their burden even before the defense took the case because of the overwhelming physical need for the strength she would have needed to move Gary from one part of the house to the burn pit. I believe they didn't meet it. I have never believed that they met their burden, especially when her daughter took the stand and said that her mom has scoliosis and she's 120 pounds, he's 330 pounds. And one more thing, Michael, I'm not nearly as talented as an attorney as the great Jack Rice, but on day 2 of deliberation, I did predict that this would be a hung jury. I predicted that, and I predicted it when the jury was asking to hear the recordings over and over and over, despite the fact that during the case they heard it multiple times. I'm very proud of this jury. They're doing their homework. Anytime a jury takes more than 48 hours, I know they're doing their homework. And when I was asked, why do you think they want to listen to these, even though they've been listened to multiple times, it's because there's politics that go into play in these jury rooms. Lots of politics. They take a poll when they first go back, and they're not a monolith. When they go back to start their deliberations, they're not always on the same page. They don't even know what the other person's thinking, so they take an immediate poll to see where they are, and then the politics start between jury members of one person trying to convince somebody to take their position, right? Because we're all human beings, right? All of us want to be agreed with. Nothing would make me happier than if people tell me, hey, I agree with you. If somebody tells me I don't agree with you, I'll pretend that it doesn't bother me, but it will really bother me deep down. And so if I'm in a jury setting, I'm going to want to convince other jurors of my position, and they're going to want to convince me of their positions. So I predicted that this would be a hung jury on day 2 only because of that, but I have never believed that they met their burden. The state never showed me how, even in their theory of the case, how Melody Farris murdered Gary Farris in one part of the house and moved him to another part of the house. They've just never shown it to me. And so for me, case wasn't proven, but it might end up in a hung jury.
Well, you know, I think we've had that hung jury notice once from the judge where he said, listen, you are tasked with going out, deliberating, and reaching a verdict, so that's what you're going to do. Now, what we're understanding is that it is a verdict, so it could be a mixed verdict, Michael. It could be a not guilty on all charges, or it could be a guilty on all charges.
Yeah, one of those instances where that Allen charge worked.
Yes.
And it often does.
Good point.
And I would love to see what that dynamic was in the last couple of hours that took this jury from being hung and feeling like they weren't going to get any closer, that they had to come and tell the judge they were hung, to now having what we're assuming is an actual verdict.
Yeah, that's what we're assuming. We're going to wait and see, but it's a perfect time so you don't miss a thing to squeeze in. And National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, let me start with you. I'm surprised. Again, I'm surprised it's guilty across the board, but that's because I felt like Scott, equal reasonable doubt for me in my mind. And I know, Michael, you've been pretty vocal about the same. What do you think now?
I'm stunned. In the prior block, Jack Rice said that he's puzzled to see how they went from being hung and so quickly having a verdict, and now they actually have a unanimous verdict. I think I'm really riveted for somebody to study this jury and poll them and interview them. So how, in that jury room, how did you guys get from being hung to being unanimous? And how, again, what weighed more for you guys? Was it the phone calls, or was it the fact that it's an impossibility to physically murder a 300-pound, 6'5" deadweight human being and move them from the basement? There was blood stains on the basement steps that were wiped out. That was part of the prosecution's case. How did somebody do that when they're 120 pounds with scoliosis in their back that can barely move even her own body weight? I'm 200 pounds. I can't even bench 250 pounds, right? Even my own body weight, right? How was she able to move somebody who's 3 times her body weight without tons of help? Or not, or just not do it? It puzzles me. I really want to know. I was riveted. I had heart palpitations waiting for that verdict to be read. I'm 1,000 miles away. I don't know any of these people. I was very riveted by this case from day one. And it just makes me think, Judge Ashley, when William Shakespeare wrote his tragedies and his plays, he didn't need to use his imagination. He just looked at human tragedies of people he probably knew. You're looking at this woman in a courtroom. She's in the same courtroom as her children, two of them looked just like her, and she blamed them for the murder of their father, her husband, and they blamed her for the murder of their father, her husband. And they're in the courtroom together, and this is a human tragedy of epic proportions, but it happens all the time. And we have the privilege of knowing about it and seeing it on court TV. I'm riveted, and I'm really puzzled. I don't think I'm smart enough to know the answers to these questions, or why the jury was able to go from being hung. I'm completely aghast. I don't know. I want to know. Smarter minds than me will one day tell me and will teach me. I don't think I have the intellect necessary to answer this riddle. It's a riddle for me, maybe for somebody else it's not.
It was really an incredible moment. You know, the drama of waiting, and you and I commented on it. She started taking off her earrings, knowing that she was going to turn that over because she had been free going up to this point.
Time.
Now she was going to be taken into custody and probably in the custody for a very, very long time. She is facing life in prison with or without the possibility of parole. It was intense, obviously, for everyone, Michael Jaafar, because as you heard from our own Matt Johnson, Scott, the son who they were pointing the finger at, broke down in the gallery. This is a crime that broke this family apart. And if you buy the defense's story, this should make those kids happy, right? Because they wanted her to be convicted so they could get more out of the father's death. Again, you know, the jury decided that that wasn't the story, but I would love to get your reaction.
This is earth-shattering, dramatic moves. I won't be able to top what Jack did in terms of the emotional aspect of this thing, right? I remember the first trial I ever lost. It was a misdemeanor case. It was larceny, right? It was a bench trial. It wasn't even a jury trial. The first case I lost was a bench trial for larceny with the maximum sentence being 90 days, right? I still remember. It was in 2007, right? I still remember it, and it was emotional, and that was nothing, right? He's right. These are just absolute. I remember when I was a young attorney, an attorney would, we were working on a big case, and we won it, right? I went out to celebrate, and he said, and he went home, he said, I want to tell you something. You're going to be depressed for a couple of weeks. And I told him, well, why? We just won the case. He said, here's why. We've been working on this case for a year. We just won the case. The case is over. You had a sense of purpose in your life, and it was this case. For a year, you had other things you were working on, but you immersed yourself into this case, you and the team. Your sense of purpose is gone for at least a good couple of weeks until we get into a bigger case, into another case. And he was right. It was I was loafing around. It was difficult, right? And then what Matt Johnson just said, and that guy's tenacious, by the way. He's given me lots of insight about this case that I didn't have. He said, I just learned right now that one of the jury foreperson was pacing. It's going to live with that person for the rest of his life, right? He was pacing because they had to wait. And the fact that this jury was hung earlier today, to me, it boggles my mind in terms of the human tragedy of it. And she was pointing a finger at her son, who looks just like her, right? And there's going to be checks administered to the son because a probate attorney is going to bring him in and say, now that your mom has been found guilty, these parts of the estate go from her to you. And you were responsible for her getting convicted, and you are responsible for destroying. I'm not saying he did anything wrong. I'm just saying he's responsible for the destruction of their family. I'm not saying he's wrong for that. It's a fact. It's a fact that had it not been for him testifying against his mom, I don't know if she would have been convicted. But the point is the human tragedy element of this. And then Michael also reminding me that she was taking off her earrings after it kind of sunk in. That made me sad. It really made me sad. There's two universes. There's a universe where she did this and the universe where she didn't do it. We technically don't know which universe we live in. Neither does the jury. Nobody knows, right? She knows and Scott knows, right? But in either universe, it's a tragedy. And if we live in the universe where she did not do this, that's an even bigger tragedy.
In my mind, Judge, turns to Amanda, who took the stand, was extremely emotional, and she stood by her mom, was the only one, and, you know, it split the family. She didn't even speak to the other kids. And, you know, she was betrayed on the stand when they told her about a lie she had told. I wonder how she feels now. She said she just wanted the system to play out and that justice be served.
Yeah.
Well, justice is her mom going to jail.
I can't imagine. And I was really surprised about Scott being wailing, breaking down and wailing, because I too felt like if you believed how he was on the stand and what they were saying, that he'd be okay with his mother being convicted because she did it, yet he fell apart.
This is years of emotion, though.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
never know.
Years,
and
exactly,
it's your family.
Exactly.
It's your family at the end of the day.
What my experience has been, the 6 to 8 weeks after the sentencing is when it starts to kick in that you're not leaving that place. And boy, when that happens, I mean, all the emotion that you would expect to see in court, then you begin to see.
I can imagine.
And it's really something. Michael Jaafar, I want to just throw something out to you. I know your big question for the case has been, how could this woman of her size have moved the body of the victim's size from point A to point B, which would have been up some stairs and outside to a burn pile. There are a lot of people online who look at it and say, this state showed, or the state showed, that she was the only one possibly on the property at the time of it, that it would have happened. She had to have did it, and they don't care about where it actually happened and how we got to the burn pile. She did it. And again, the state didn't necessarily have to prove to them how she got him up the stairs. So what would you make of that?
In their opening statements, they said, in their opening statement, the state said, I want you to shrink your universe and look at it very, very small. And then they said exactly what you just said, which is she's the only person who had the ability, the means. But I believe that the defense was also able to show that her son, Scott, also could have potentially been there. And really, we don't know between the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th exactly when he died. There was evidence introduced. To that, Michael, what I've always said, and I've debated with this with a couple of colleagues, it would have been impossible, right? What would have been more possible is that the state was wrong in terms of whether or not she was the only person that did it. I also said that their theory of the case would have fit if the theory was she shot him when he was standing in front of the burn pit and then pushed him in. Another theory that the defense had was maybe perhaps he had some sort of a medical issue and he fell into the burn pit, right? But then again, you have the bullet in his ribs. My response to all of that is it's impossible for her to have moved him. There is not any even theoretical way that somebody could have shown me that she could have moved a 6'5", 300-pound person while she had scoliosis, even if she had a high-low that found a way to go up and down stairs, or even if he didn't die in the basement, if he died in any other part of the house, even if he died next to the burn pit. How is a person of her physical stature and limitations able to push him into the burn pit? It just was completely impossible. And if she shot him, there would have been blood residue in the concrete, which can't be washed off like it could be with a staircase. To me, Michael, and I think the reason why I'm so shocked and surprised is because it's a physical impossibility to me that a person of her physical stature could have moved him to the burn pit. I'm stunned. I'm flabbergasted. I'm not done looking at this case. I got to find out, just for my own knowledge, how they could do it. And one last thing, when I tell clients, look, yeah, this evidence looks good, that evidence looks good, but last time I checked, you have a jury of human beings, not robots, right? And the problem with that is human beings tend towards the inflammatory. They always tend towards the inflammatory. We all do it, right? And so Jack was right. The phone call mattered to them more than I thought it would. I did not think that the phone call would have mattered, give it in comparison to the physical impossibility of a non-Olympic weightlifter push. Olympic weightlifters can only bench press twice their body weight. They can't bench press more than twice. He was 3 times her body weight, and she's not an Olympic weightlifter. So Jack was right. That phone call mattered to them, and even that phone call was inconclusive. But that phone call was so inflammatory in their minds that it wasn't as inflammatory in my mind, which shows why, you know, I called it wrong on this one.
Michael, I'll start with you. You know what struck me about Gary's testimony, not Gary's testimony, excuse me, Rusty's testimony, was he was under tremendous pressure. He wasn't telling the police a whole lot. Then they sort of ratcheted up the pressure by saying, hey, look, we're going to end up charging you in this case. And at one point, he even tells them, I don't know what you want me to tell you. We've all seen people in that position, and they will say and do just about anything to keep themselves out of trouble. That's one of the reasons I thought maybe he gave them that initial statement where he said, oh, this is what she told me, because that kind of took the pressure off him completely. What do you think about that, Mike?
Yeah, I've said from the middle of this case until now that his involvement in this case almost felt like an interrogation, almost like a confession. Where, we talked about the Richard Allen, right? Confessions, right? That's what his involvement was. I think they were too aggressive with him. I don't think that the defense really hammered that point home, but he was not credible. His testimony was not very credible. When he was in the courtroom, she also perked up a little bit. She was smiling at him, but he was a little bit odd. Even when the snip that you just played right now, where he asked him did you commit this murder? I mean, it's almost like they had this guy's number. They were in his head. They lived rent free in his head, and so he caused, we now know he caused a lot of havoc in her case, and his phone calls with her were the death knell for her case. So this was a very, kind of a disorienting witness for the defense. I did not like him too much, but I felt like that the prosecution and the state were way too aggressive with him. You never like to see situations like that.
And I think it's trickery, but we know the police can do some of those things in order to see what you will say. Let's talk. I want to listen together, Jack, because Rusty did say, hey, Melody never confessed to this. Let's listen to that.
Yeah, and if you remember, Michael Jaafar, that first phone call, the one that he did at the request of the police, he goes and tells her. You know what I mean? And that had to have factored in, because it factored into my thinking about his testimony. That's a pretty big step, where the police ask you to tape a phone call and see what you can get, but you also tell the person that you're calling that they are in fact being taped and the police are listening. I think that's a huge step, and I think that worked against him.
Yeah, his conscience came into his head when she picked up the phone, when he heard her voice. And at the end of the day, it would have been conceivable for him. He would have spoken to an attorney. I'm sure he spoke to an attorney. And the attorney would have told him what I would have told him, which is it's very conceivable they would have charged you with conspiracy to commit murder, right? Because you stood to gain. You had an affair with this person. She would have become a very wealthy person if she could murder her husband and get away with it. And so it's very conceivable that you will, in fact, be charged with conspiracy to commit murder. I don't know if he spoke to an attorney. I would be shocked if he wasn't. And if he spoke to an attorney, the attorney wouldn't have told him, no, it's not possible. You're an attorney, and Rusty Barton talks to you and he says, I had an affair with this woman, and all of a sudden her husband disappeared. Were you in the same state? No, I was not. Well, it's still conceivable you would have committed an inchoate crime. You conspired with her to kill her husband. You got to be very careful. You have to cooperate, and as long as you did nothing wrong, your cooperation will exonerate. Do you care about this woman being exonerated? Not as much as I care about my own skin. Okay, if you only care about your own skin, here's a way to do it. But he did it in a very clumsy way, Michael. You're right. Yeah. It was very clumsy the way he did it, and so he created a lot of havoc for her case.
And Mike, I just want to let you know, he did actually speak to an attorney. He testified that he went out, and this was something that was used by the state when they were questioning him. He goes out of the room where he's talking to police, talks to his attorney, and then he comes back and tells them what he told them about the phone call. So that was something they were telling this jury, saying, look, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah. And